I try to look good for these videos. I try to have the aesthetic background, but like, does it ever work? No. So if this video looks like a mess, oh well. السلام عليكم في multaverba. أنا اسمي دانيا وفي هذا الفيديو أريد أن أتكلم عن لماذا وكيف أدرس اللغات العربية. Hello everyone, welcome back to multaverba, and in this video I'm going to be talking about like how and why I learn Arabic, along with giving you like, some tips on how to learn language and that kind of thing. For those of you who don't know, I'm actually undertaking a languages course at college at the moment, focusing mainly in Spanish and Arabic. And basically in this video I just want to give like a couple of tips on like how to get started in learning Arabic, and also like just general like language tips, because like I feel like a lot of these tips for this video will also apply to like any language that you're learning. So yeah, yalla, let's go. So before we get into like the tips and stuff, probably like one of the most common things that I'm asked like by people who are either learning Arabic or want to learn Arabic, or people who are just like curious about the language in general, is the difference between Amiya or dialect and Fusha or the standard Arabic. For those of you who don't know, Arabic is not really like a single language, if that makes sense. And even though there is like a written standard that like everyone learns in school, that you hear on the news, it's even used in like some kids cartoons and that kind of thing, this like modern standard Arabic is not what people speak on a day-to-day basis. Most people will understand like modern standard Arabic, most people speak in Amiya or dialect. Dialects can vary to the point where, for example, someone from like Iraq and someone from Morocco mightn't necessarily like be able to understand each other when they speak in their dialect, and that's kind of why standard Arabic exists. It's mainly to act as almost like a bridge dialect between like all the different forms of Arabic, and is loosely based on the Arabic found in the Quran, or the Holy Book of Islam. An example of just like how different like the different like dialects can get. For example, if you want to say, do you speak Arabic and Fusha, you would say, هل تتكلموا اللغة العربية? However, someone from like Lebanon per se might just say, بتحكي عربي, which as you can see is completely different. And then if you take like another dialect, for example, a Moroccan might actually just say like, وش كتهدر عربي? That pronunciation was awful. However, when people like ask me like whether or not you should learn like the standard Arabic or you should learn the like Mahamiya, like the dialect, that is like really like up to you and depends like what you want back from the language. For example, like I'm mostly focusing on Fusha at the moment because I want to use Arabic in my professional life later. I want to work as an interpreter, preferably maybe for conferences or maybe like legal cases and that kind of thing. So because of that reason, Fusha is very useful for me and it's important for me to know, as it's kind of... But going back to like whether or not you should learn like Amiya or Fusha, I would generally say, for example, if you're just like focused on communicating like with a particular like one like group of people, say that you live in a city where there's a large like Lebanese population, it would make a lot more sense for you if you just wanted to like, I don't know, maybe like order food in Arabic in the Lebanese restaurant, that you would learn the Lebanese dialect. However, there are like so many videos like on the internet like going like more into this topic, and people who know like a lot more about Arabic about me. However, if you are interested in me talking about the differences between Arabiya and Fusha, let me know in the comments below. So for today's video, I basically gathered like 5 tips that you can use to like get started in Arabic, to improve your Arabic, or whatever level you're at, just like to help you like progress in language. The first and most important tip is to find a good resource. So obviously there are the usual culprits such as Teach Yourself or Asimil, or you can even try Colloquial if you're going for like more of a dialectual approach. On top of that, you have of course like the Duolingo course, which for Arabic is like actually like not that bad. Like I didn't find it like that like some there's a couple of Duolingo courses like that are just like, but anyway, it might also depend on where you live. For example, like here in France, like there's a very large like North African community. So for example, I find that it's quite easy to get like resources and books and that kind of thing to learn specifically Darija, which is the North African variant of Arabic. But of course there is like YouTube. For example, you have like YouTubers like Imran Alawiya, who is a really good YouTuber if you're wanting to like try Fusha. However, for dialects, there are of course like a multitude of channels. 2 channels in particular that I do like is Easy Palestinian Arabic, which is really good for like Levantine. For Moroccan or like North African Arabic, I would generally refer to Effective Arabic, which is a channel that I use to like practice like Moroccan. It is definitely like... yeah. On top of that, like when it comes to like which dialect you want to learn, like it might just like come down to like which culture like draws you the most. For example, Even though like I do dabble a little bit in Levantine Arabic, I do find myself a lot more drawn to Moroccan Arabic, and that's mainly because I do enjoy Moroccan culture.
Parce que moi, je suis intelligent. فهمتيني حبيبة?
But basically, like, it's as per usual with like any language, you're going to be able to find like a whole bunch of like YouTube channels and resources like just by looking in like learn X language, and Arabic is not really that different. The second tip, which is actually a really important tip, especially for a language like Arabic, is get audio input. Obviously there are the usual culprits such as like Easy Languages, who do have a series like in Easy Arabic, which is mostly a mix of like Egyptian and Levantine Arabic to my knowledge. I do think they have like one episode where they actually have Tunisian Arabic, which I think I like watched it like once. So one website that I find like really useful to get like content, particularly in Arabic, is the website Playling. So Playling is basically like a completely free to use website where you can like filter like different like Arabic videos, not only based on like level, but also like dialect and even content. So like if you want to watch like, I don't know, like Lebanese comedy, they have that. If you want to watch, I don't know, like Moroccan cooking shows, they also have that. So really, I think that Playling, particularly, not even just like for dialects, like they also have stuff in like standard Arabic as well, or even sometimes they have like it in both, like it might be like a mixture of the two. But I would definitely say that like Playling is such an essential website, and it's very much underrated like amongst like the Arabic learning community. Of course, as well, when it comes to like more like I suppose like media that's not necessarily like aimed at learners, there is like of course like music. The Arabic world is home to like many different like famous artists. One artist I'm very much enjoying at the moment is Nancy Ejrem, who is this like kind of like Lebanese pop star. Really good music. I would personally recommend the song Meshahedi and Salamet. One thing to note is that a lot of music in the Arab world does like come from Lebanon, sometimes a little bit from Egypt and like Morocco as well. However, that does not mean that like you're not going to be able to find music in like standard Arabic. For example, Disney used to dub their stuff mostly into Egyptian Arabic, apart from like a few different things. However, a lot of their newer stuff has actually been dubbed into Fusha. So for example, you have Melikat al-Fulj or Moena, which have been completely dubbed into Fusha Arabic, which means that you can actually like get like a lot of content, and even like just like looking up like different scenes and songs and that kind of thing. I find that like amongst like language learners, like there's a lot of people who use Disney to like learn languages. So if you are looking to like learn Arabic, either like looking to learn a bit of Musri or even a bit of Fusha, that's definitely a good place to go. On top of that, once again, like particularly for like Amiya, like dialect Arabic, there are a lot of good like series in Arabic. Egypt is generally considered almost like the Arabic version of like Hollywood in some ways. They have produced a lot of like very like classic shows. I did just watch a series called Finding Ola, which is available on Netflix actually. However, I have been told like it doesn't really like represent like daily life in Egypt, which I mean is kind of clear when you watch it. That being said as well, like on Netflix you can also find like a surprisingly large amount of like really good like Jordanian shows. For example, you have like shows like Webi School for Girls, or you also have this TV show Jin. The third tip that I have is to get language classes. Now obviously this is only like if you can afford it. However, on websites like Italki, for example, you can actually like find like tutors and that kind of thing for pretty like reasonable prices. Another great thing about Italki, similar to websites like Playling, is that you can actually like sort by dialect and even by country as well. So for example, let's say you want to learn Levantine Arabic, but you specifically want to learn, I don't know, like Lebanese Arabic as opposed to Jordanian Arabic. You can actually like filter to find like teachers who teach Levantine Arabic but specifically are from Lebanon and will have the Lebanese accent. However, if you can't afford language classes, there is a way around it in most cases, and that is to go to Duolingo and try out their new classes feature. So I haven't actually like tried this out yet. However, most of the classes on the website you do have to pay for. However, there are a few like people who just like volunteer and will like organize like groups to just like speak in Arabic, or even like just do like lessons just because they want to like just teach the language. For example, I'll actually be attending like a free Arabic like virtual practice class like tomorrow without paying anything. So if you're like not necessarily in the place to like be paying for like languages and that kind of thing, I would definitely recommend like trying out like the Duolingo classes feature. It is a new feature and I think they're still kind of like smoothing out the bumps and that kind of thing. Definitely, however, be something that I would recommend like if you're not necessarily in the place to pay for classes, or you want to even do like group classes, because a lot of the classes are actually involved in are done in kind of a group format. My fourth tip, and this kind of relates to like what I was saying about like getting language classes and also being able to like practice the language and kind of like with a person as opposed to just like, you know, just like have like a very like passive understanding of the language, and that is to do a language exchange. But one thing that I'll say about language exchanges is that like try to make friends as opposed to language partners. The thing about like making friends as opposed to language partners is that if you like just approach someone and it's like, okay, teach me your language, I'll teach you your language, it becomes a very robotic and almost like transactional relationship, and that's not really what you want, because like those relationships are not necessarily relationships that you're going to like enjoy or even like gain that much from. And a lot of that is due to just the sheer fact that that is completely based on only like both parties like motivation to actually like learn the language. However, by reaching out and like finding people who have like similar interests in you, who are similar age to you, just have like a very like similar vibe, those are relationships that are not only going to last, but that you're actually like going to enjoy talking to them as well. Of course, there are like typical like apps that you can use. For example, Tandem. You can also use HelloTalk. Those are two that I use. Some people do use the italki forums as well. However, if you know of any other like language apps that are good for exchange and that kind of thing, be sure to let me know in the comments below. However, my fifth and final tip, and this doesn't necessarily apply only to Arabic, but I feel like definitely applies to like all like non-Western languages, and that is to learn about the culture. So I understand this is like a very like vague point to make, and at the same time like it's important to learn about the culture of every language that you learn. However, I feel like particularly when you're learning a language that is not necessarily like a Western language, you're kind of like moving out of like a lot of like the familiarity. For example, let's say that you're a native English speaker and you go to learn French. Yes, of course it's important to learn about like French culture and all that kind of stuff, but at the same time like there still is like a very much like a huge amount of overlap. And the same goes like if you go to learn like most other like European languages, be it German or Spanish or even as far as field as Russian sometimes. However, one thing to note is that when you're learning Arabic, you're not dealing with like a so-called like Western culture anymore. You're dealing with like a whole culture that has like a lot of different customs, a lot of different values. For example, if you look at the 100 most commonly used words in Arabic, like one of the words that you will come across, I think it's actually one of the first words that you'll come across, is the word Allah, which means God. Even though this can seem like a very like, you know, overly like religious like term, it's actually used in like everyday speech, even by people I've noticed who aren't necessarily religious. For example, there are so many phrases that use the word Allah that aren't necessarily religious but are just like part of like the custom. For example, like Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, Yallah, Wallahi. Like there's just like so many different ways that you can use the word Allah. On top of that, I feel like particularly for a language like Arabic, there are so many misconceptions about like Arab culture, and just we in the West get like, we kind of like have the Arab culture painted in a certain way in the media that isn't necessarily true. The thing about Arab culture is that it's very deep, it's very rich, there's pretty much like, there's just so much to it. Like it's not just like, oh, like politics, there's so much like art, music, history to it. And I feel like particularly moving out of like that kind of like Western sphere of influence and going into a completely different sphere of influence, I feel like that knowing about the culture and knowing about current events, particularly for a language like Arabic, is extremely important. And I feel like this doesn't actually just apply to Arabic, it applies to pretty much like any language where you're kind of moving out of that like, you know, typical like Spanish, French, German, Italian. For example, I feel like the same would actually apply in a lot of ways, like if you went to learn a language like Korean or Japanese that were like in the kind of like more East Asian part of the world. Not the camera cutting off. As I was saying, pretty much like I feel like this is not necessarily something that applies uniquely to Arabic, but also to pretty much like any languages that are kind of outside that kind of like Western sphere of influence. However, that's all for this video. It's a little bit of a shorter one. I'm trying to like make my videos a little bit shorter and like kind of have more of them just so I can like edit them a bit easier and also get more videos out to you all. However, question of the day, are you learning Arabic? And if so, let me know why. And if you aren't learning Arabic, why not? Anyway, ma salama, bye!